At the end of the day, keeping your country safe is the first task.
Andy Burnham, he doesn't have any sort of foreign affairs experience. Does that concern you?
Not at all, because most of them will come in with there's a lot of political clout, a lot of political experience. Keir Starmer, when it comes to Ukraine, when it comes to international affairs, he has been driving the agenda. This country was better off having him as Prime Minister.
Let me take you on a little trip down memory lane. All of 2 months ago, when Sir Keir Starmer still talked of a decade in power, when his Defence Secretary still believed he was keeping the country safe, and when the King of the North hadn't even thought about taking the train south. And at that moment, many moons ago, here's what the PM told me about defence spending.
We do need to go further. I've made commitments to NATO about going further. We're finalising the Defence Investment Plan, which is actually a future-look plan as well. It's not just about how much you spend, it's strategically what do we need as a country.
Fast forward to now, and the Defence Investment Plan is about to be published at last. But in the meantime, everything's changed. So let me just remind you how we got here. Well, one of the first signs of unhappiness at the heart of government was when the men brought in to review defence spending broke cover. Here's General Sir Richard Barrons talking to me last month.
The rational choice is to do deterrence properly in order to avoid the risks of fighting. And remember, there's no point worrying about our welfare if the cities are in ashes because we failed to deter.
The then Defence Secretary couldn't have put it better himself. Except he then did, with a scorching resignation letter, accusing the PM of being unable and the Treasury unwilling to find the dosh for defence. Here's John Healey in the Commons after he quit.
This is the age of hard power and rising threat. This is not the moment for calibration or incremental change. This means bigger politics, bolder priorities, harder choices. And Britain's challenge now is the transformation and the rearmament of our armed forces.
That bigger politics, the bolder priorities, the harder choices now fall to the man who may or may not be Labour's messiah. No one knows exactly what the PM-in-waiting, Andy Burnham, will do on defence spending. And he wasn't taking questions today. So here's what we've got to go on.
From here on, every pound raised from taxpayers will work harder for them. And that approach will apply fully to the Defence Investment Plan. We need to safeguard sovereign manufacturing and production capability across the country in critical sectors like steel, defence, energy, food and farming, rather than just being prepared to let it go, as we have sadly done in the past.
You know, he's showing a bit of leg there, but not much. On the show today, Mark Rutte, the NATO Secretary-General, tells me Burnham should see higher defence spending as an opportunity to grow Britain's economy. And he gives me his verdict on the incoming PM and the one who's just been shown the door, who now, by the way, is being tipped to replace Rutte himself as NATO chief. So Andy Burnham, the Prime Minister in waiting, is promising a new era and that he's going to rewire Britain. We'll hear what he had to say at his big speech in Manchester a bit later on in the show. But of course, there's that old adage that defence is the first priority of government. With Number 10 about to publish its long-awaited Defence Investment Plan, NATO Secretary-General Mark Rutte was in Downing Street earlier, knowing the Starmer era is about to end and that the next Prime Minister will have the job of turning that plan into reality. Well, after Rutte finished his meetings in Whitehall earlier, he came to visit me here on the sofa for an exclusive TV interview. Take a look. Mark Rutte, you've come straight from a meeting with a Prime Minister who has just weeks left in office. Now, his Defence Secretary quit just over a fortnight ago, saying that the Prime Minister was unable and the Treasury unwilling, and I quote, to commit the resources that the nation needs to defend the country. Did you find him either able or willing to do so now?
I always found him able and willing to do what is necessary. And the UK consistently, over the years, has done what is necessary to defend the United Kingdom, but also to help to defend the whole of NATO territory, because this country understands what is at stake here. That is, we have seen with the war in Ukraine, the Russian build-up, the threat it poses to Europe. We have to do more. And you will always have your national discussions, which, of course, I will not go into, whether you need to spend more or less. But I think the direction of travel, what I'm seeing here in the UK, the extra spend on defence, which I expect to be announced over the coming days or weeks.
Probably tomorrow, we understand.
I heard different timelines on that, but I think it is positive.
Right, positive. But the Defence Secretary quit because the plan that he was being asked to sign off on would, he said, make the country less safe. I mean, is the UK, in your assessment, currently safe from Russian aggression or not?
Yes, it is. Because of what the UK is doing. You have an extremely innovative defence sector. You have, of course, your men and women in uniform. But also the fact that what will happen over the coming days or weeks in terms of extra defence spending will not be the last word on it. It will be a big step towards what is important, the 3.5% we committed in The Hague. So I don't expect the UK to get there in one go, in one big step.
Right.
That would be too much to ask, but I think it will be an important step on the way.
But the 3.5% is by 2035, and current UK plans, unless you know something we don't, see us getting only to 2.68% by 2030. There's no concrete timetable to get to 3%. You know, that... how much more work does Keir Starmer's successor need to do?
I think what you will see is that the UK will make a big step, which is one, which will not get you to the 3.5, but a big step on the way to the 3.5%, which will mean there is more necessary. But I think that will also be acknowledged, that there is more to be done over the coming years. But hey, we don't have committed to get to the 5% or the 3.5 core defence spending in one big leap.
Right.
Germany will reach it in 2029. We see Poland and the Baltic states having already reached it, but other countries are behind the United Kingdom. So in the end, what we committed as 32 allies is to reach the 3.5% with a credible path to get there by latest 2035. And this big step helps by building that credible path.
Yeah, but the credible path isn't there in terms of the steps along the way. You know, that the end game is sort of there in the distance. But do you get a sense that the UK has now gripped that there needs to be those staging posts along the way?
Yes, I think that's absolutely the intent. Not only because that is something we agreed in The Hague, but because it is deeply felt in the government, in political circles, that we do this for a reason. And the reason is that the world has changed since the Cold War ended and the Berlin Wall came down. And we have seen over the last 5 to 10 years how Russia is rapidly building up its armed forces. We see China investing heavily in its military. We see China, North Korea, Iran and Russia working together. We have seen a terrible, unprovoked onslaught on Ukraine. So for all these reasons, we cannot be naive. We need to spend the money we need to spend.
And so the intent is there from the current Prime Minister, but he's only there for a few weeks longer. Do you have any sense that the intent is also there from his successor, expected to be Andy Burnham?
Well, obviously, there's only one Prime Minister at a time, and that's Keir Starmer. Of course, I know that he will leave office, and Andy Burnham, it seems, is... well, you don't have to be a political whiz-kid to predict that he might become the next Prime Minister. But what I know from this country over the last 67... Irvin Bevin, he was he the name?
Yeah.
Ernest Bevin. He was the Foreign Secretary in the Attlee government. He was one of the founders of NATO. So this country was at the start of NATO. It was the Labour Party at the start of NATO. So I have every confidence that whoever is Prime Minister, that will be there. And by the way, don't forget that this is not only because we have to defend ourselves, this is also because there is a defence dividend coming from this. And that has to do with the fact that these investments will also lead to more jobs. You have a very successful defence sector, defence industrial sector in the United Kingdom. I will meet with industry leaders tonight in Brussels, also from the UK, and I'm absolutely convinced these extra investments will also lead to more economic growth, to more jobs.
So would your message to Andy Burnham, who's talked about prioritising the cost of living, but, you know, he wants to get the UK economy growing again, defence is the way to do this, Andy?
It is an important element. I'm sorry, I have no messages for him because, first of all, I guess he will be the next Prime Minister. But again, I now work with Keir Starmer, and as soon as he comes in, if that is the case, I look forward to work with him. But I have every confidence that there is a continuity of strategy, of purpose in this country. When it comes to the Labour governments, when it comes to the Conservative governments, look at what Maggie Thatcher did when it comes to defence, and John Major, and of course Cameron, but also, again, look at Tony Blair and Gordon Brown. So there is a consistent realization that this country has to be on the forefront, and it has always been in NATO. You were one of the few countries who was consistently spending above the 2% we agreed to in 2014 in Wales. I think till a couple of years ago, there were only 3 countries spending 2%. One of them, the UK. And again, I expect the UK to be on the forefront.
Well, except it's currently a sort of laggard towards the bottom of the table on rearmaments. And so
when you look at the overall defence spending, you're still in the top 10 at the moment.
Right. But if there's any backsliding, you know, and let's face it, room for manoeuvre is very tight. You know, taxes and borrowing are record highs. So your message to whoever comes next about the importance, the urgency of this defence spending?
Yes, and I was Prime Minister for 14 years in my country, the Netherlands, so I know that there is always this extremely difficult discussion going on between all the different priorities for a government. And of course, but at the end of the day, keeping your country safe is the first task. The second task immediately following that is making sure you have a strong economy. The interesting thing about defence spending is it keeps the country safe. There is a fierce urgency of now when you look at the Russian build-up and what China is doing. But there is also an impact on that second big priority, which is jobs, which is economic growth, because there will be, it will have an impact on that, a positive impact.
I know you say you'll look forward to meeting Andy Burnham if and when he's confirmed as Prime Minister. But, you know, he's been mayor of a town, to quote your friend Donald Trump. He's been Health Secretary and Culture Secretary. He doesn't have any sort of foreign affairs experience. Does that concern you?
Not at all, because but what you see with most Prime Ministers, when they come in, except for when they have been Defence Secretary or Foreign Secretary before, but most of them will come in with, there's a lot of political clout, a lot of political experience. But when it comes to the international stage, you have the best advisors in this country. You have fantastic ambassadors, fantastic security advisors, fantastic senior military advisors in the Defence Department, who will help the Prime Minister to get up and running in a couple of days. So I've no doubt. And your Prime Ministers are generally smart people, so they will get it. And
potentially David Miliband could be Foreign Secretary, is the rumour.
Well, I'm not going to speculate who will do what. I was Prime Minister of the Netherlands, not of the United Kingdom. But I'm always impressed by the quality of your senior politicians and the speed by which they understand the issues and then drive the issues, because this is what we need. Keir Starmer, and let me say this, when it comes to Ukraine, when it comes to international affairs, he has been driving the agenda. He has been agenda setting over the last 2 years, and I thanked him for that this morning. He is still there. He will be there at the NATO summit. So I think this country was better off having him as Prime Minister.
What, better off than what might come next?
No, better off in the sense that he was willing to make that sacrifice to become Prime Minister of this country. And I think he did when it comes to the whole international political arena. He did extremely well. He was, again, very important last week in the G7, what I heard from many sources, because he understands that it is about purpose and it is about atmospherics. It is also about the diplomatic part of the job.
Would you support him potentially to succeed you as NATO Secretary-General?
I read all these rumours, but hey, let's first make sure that he ends the job at a moment of the choosing of the British political system, that success will be there, and I wish him well, whatever he's going to do.
You're not denying that you would, you know, you'd be a supportive voice.
I mean, I'm in this role now, so there's no vacancy.
Right. Yeah, there's a conflict of interest there. Yeah. But I mean, you're sad to see him go as Prime Minister.
I genuinely like the guy. He is decent, he knows what he is doing, he is influential, he has purpose. When it comes to Ukraine, for example, the fact that this country is leading the coalition of the willing, is leading the Ukraine Defence Contact Group, is now leading, together with France, on the Strait of Hormuz and regaining the freedom of navigation when it comes to the Strait of Hormuz. This Prime Minister is really driving that. So, hey, you guys decide who is Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. I will work with everybody who is in that role. But he did well over the last 2 years.
But whoever ends up running NATO. I mean, clearly Keir Starmer has the credentials for a top international job, from what you've said.
But let's first see what he wants to do. I have no idea what his plans are. Let's see.
Apparently he's quite keen. Let's talk about next week's NATO summit. Speaking to Sky News last year, you called Donald Trump the daddy of NATO.
No, I didn't. I said to him, this is... And I made a mistake, so I completely own this now. But what I said is, when he had been angry with the Israelis and the Iranians the day before he came to The Hague, I said, sometimes daddy has to be forceful.
Okay.
I meant father. I later realized that daddy has so many other connotations.
So
when he came home, he made this video, Daddy is home. So he owned it.
Yeah.
This is why I like him, because he has that humor.
All right, so you don't
really
feel you
funny.
were sort of played by him in that way?
No, I loved how he then made my mistake and owned it himself. And I own the mistake. This is my job.
But is daddy, father, about to walk out on the kids? Are you worried about that?
The US is totally invested in NATO, because the US understands that NATO provides, look at Iran, 4,000 to 5,000 sorties from European bases to in the context of Epic Fury. The US could not have done this without Europe as a big power projection platform. And then NATO providing them the ability to strike deep, to control the major choke points of the world, to have industrial depth, to prevent the nuclear submarines from Russia ending up at the US shores. For all these reasons, the US is in NATO, not only to protect Europe, but also because there is a direct interest for the United States itself.
Yeah, but he says that NATO hasn't been there for America, you know, over Iran, for example. He says NATO's a paper tiger.
There is disappointment, and I discussed this last week again with him in the White House, but I also pointed out to the fact that these are isolated cases, and that when you look at the overwhelming picture, 4,000 to 5,000 planes taking off from Bucharest to the United Kingdom, to France, to so many other countries in Europe, basically implementing the bilateral basing agreements these countries have with the US.
Just finally, Andy Burnham is most likely set to become the 7th British Prime Minister in 10 years. You were the longest-serving Dutch Prime Minister. What are the secrets of political longevity?
Listening. So in coalition politics, what I learned over the years, and the same now in NATO, spend 90% of your time listening and only 10% of the time talking. Of course, this interview is not a good example, but now I have to answer your questions. And also British politics and American politics, in the end, is coalition politics, because you might think there's only one party in power, but in the end, these parties are big 10 parties with many factions within the party. So in the end, it is all coalition politics. That's the only thing I learned over the years. Spend more time listening than talking, and I wish him or her, whoever is the new Prime Minister, and it might be the former Mayor of Manchester, I wish him well.
Mark Rutte, it's been great listening to you today on The Sofa. Thank you.
Good to be back.
Well, there goes the NATO Secretary-General with his huge entourage of all men, it seems. Fascinating interview there. He's a consummate diplomat, so he was very effusive about Keir Starmer and all his achievements on the international stage, perhaps raising the hopes of the outgoing Prime Minister that he might get a job, perhaps NATO Secretary-General at some point in the future. But he was also very diplomatic about Andy Burnham, not concerned about his lack of experience on the foreign stage. And he also said that Britain is on the right track when it comes to defence spending. Not there yet, but making steps in the right direction. So I think everyone that Mark Rutte has been to see today, from the Prime Minister, the Foreign Secretary, the Defence Secretary, they will be happy with what he's said. And also Mark Rutte's message to Andy Burnham about the fact that higher defence spending could actually help British growth, that'll be music to his ears as well. Labour peer Baroness Luciana Berger and former Tory Minister Lord Ed Vaizey are on The Sofa tonight. Luciana, what did you make of that? You know, he was pretty flattering to both Andy Burnham and Keir Starmer, but the point about not being bothered about Andy Burnham not having foreign affairs experience, do you think that reflects reality?
Well, if I just rewind to the first part of your question, I thought it was a very candid speech. It was nice to see him so relaxed on the spot on the sofa and reflecting on, obviously, meetings he's having in advance of the very important NATO summit coming up. But certainly his reflections on Keir Starmer's role on the international stage is an important one, and I think, you know, speaks to the impact that he's made and the connections and the leadership that he's shown.
You think he'll get the NATO job?
Well, it's 2 years out, and also, Keir Starmer's still in post as our Prime Minister, so and who knows what he would like to do in terms of when that might change.
He wants it, though, doesn't he?
And it's a significant role, and it was interesting that we didn't hear any sort of dissent. It wasn't a no. It was definitely there wasn't a no in that response. But in your answer about Andy, I mean, who in our current cabinet, other than certainly our Foreign Secretary, currently has had that previous experience and has gone on to really show leadership on the international stage, and whether that's Prime Minister Keir Starmer or David Lammy when he was in the Foreign Secretary role previously. And I think in the current context, people forget that Andy was previously a cabinet secretary, and he will have attended international meetings and already have that.
Very much on the domestic front, though. I mean, Ed, do you think it's quite something to get the endorsement, isn't it, of the NATO chief? But do you think it matters that he hasn't had experience beyond domestic portfolios?
No, I don't think it matters at all. I don't think Keir Starmer had foreign experience before he became Prime Minister. I think Boris Johnson was very focused on putting British leadership at the heart of defending Ukraine. I don't think Boris would necessarily say he had a huge amount of foreign policy experience before he became the Prime Minister. So
he was a mayor of some town as well,
He was the mayor of some town, exactly. So these mayors of some towns are capable.
It's not a town, it's a region.
But, Mark Rutte's not going to slag off Andy Burnham when he's about to become Prime Minister. That would be obviously insane. He's not going to raise any doubts or show you a scintilla of light there, even if he has private concerns. And also there's a machine behind a British Prime Minister in terms of, Rutte referred to the fact that Britain was effectively one of the founding members of NATO. So Britain's an important part of the mix, and we're taken seriously on defence despite the debacle over the defence investment plan. So it is the job of the Secretary-General at NATO to cosy up to the new Prime Minister and to make sure that Britain is part of the response that we need in terms of the threat from Russia.
And, he's a real charmer. You've seen him cozying up to Donald Trump, haven't you? So, I mean, he's seasoned in this game. I mean, it's really interesting. We'll come on to talk about Andy Burnham's speech in a second. Yeah. There was one line on there about the Defence Investment Plan, and it sort of tallied with what Mark Rutte was saying there about the opportunities for growing the economy by investing in defence. Did you think that would chime with what Andy Burnham's looking at?
Well, definitely one of the 4 policy pillars that we heard from Andy Burnham was around reindustrialisation, and central to that was what we should be doing around defence. We're already seeing right across our country tens of thousands of jobs being created, be that in Barrow with submarines or in the Clyde with shipbuilding, but certainly there's opportunity for even more as the Defence Investment Plan is outlined. And Andy really set out today how he saw defence as a key part of that track.
Well, it was a sort of aside in the speech, wasn't it? It wasn't a central plank, as you...
Well, the central plank was about reindustrialisation.
And defence.
And defence being part of that. He didn't need to mention it, but he certainly did because of the opportunity that it presents.
Well, defence plays a huge role in reindustrialising Britain, and it plays a huge role in kick-starting a tech economy. I mean, I challenged the last government on the fact that the MOD is very bad at procuring from emerging tech companies, and we've got to get much, much better at it. There's a whole ecosystem of tech companies, particularly, obviously, in the drone area, who don't get contracts with the MOD even while they're selling drones to Ukraine. I mean, it's frankly quite shocking how bad the MOD is. They deal with the big players, the Americans like Lockheed Martin, but also British Aerospace. So we've got to get much, much better at procurement. And the stuff that came out from the DIP leaks that we're not going to commission these huge frigates and we're going to focus more on drones, it's a bit of 6 of one, half dozen the other. The biggest problem with defence procurement is we build these huge, flashy bits of kit which can quickly become out of date and their costs can become out of control. We've got to get much, much smarter on defence spending, and yes, it can contribute to the economy.
I think there's 2 other elements. If I actually think back to the speech, one was around investment in our sovereign entities and our sovereign resources, and again, he mentioned defence in that context. Certainly, there was other elements that he kind of set out in the speech around. I can't remember. There was another element that he...
Well, he mainly said that it was a sort of growth opportunity because it was a way to reinvest in British, as you say, sovereign capabilities.
And it was about national procurement. So forgive me, it was that point about national procurement where it wasn't going for those global cheap deals, and also but actually thinking about what we can and should be producing here from the UK.
And it's absolutely about regionalism as well. You've got the nuclear submarine base up in Faslane. That became a big part of the debate about Scottish independence. We've also got to invest in the infrastructure of defence. One of the reasons we can't repair our ships is because all the lifts that take them out of the water are broken. But I know it will sound an odd thing to say. I was the video games minister and the video games industry is very successful in this country. They are all over the country. What are drones? You know, they rely on video games technology a huge amount. There's a whole cross-fertilisation piece that's going on. Data is now so important in defence. We have fantastic tech companies that can help with that. So you've got to think very widely about this.
It's about learning those lessons from Ukraine, particularly on drones as well.
I mean, Mark Rutte is, he's a smoothie. He will be charming, and that's the job of a NATO boss. But the message at the heart of it was uncompromising. The fierce urgency of now, he said, in terms of defence spending. It sounds like tomorrow, when we expected to get the Defence Investment Plan, it will be sort of on a road to 3.5%, which is what the NATO commitment is, but it won't be there, will it?
Well, obviously we wait to see the detail tomorrow. We are on a journey. I was interested also reflecting on that interview just now where Mark Rutte himself said we're in the top 10 of overall defence spending. But as a proportion of GDP, we're around 2.6%. And how we're going to get to that 3.5%. Certainly we're ahead of the manifesto commitment that Labour set out at the last general election. But the threats have evolved and the threats are changing. And the demand is more. And there's also the responsibility to NATO. So, again, we wait and see that detail. We've seen billions set out. We've some indication over the course of the weekend that there's going to be more, and we'll see that detail.
A bit more, yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
like
we need clarity.
I
mean, we get fixated on this figure. It's always the way this debate runs. You get fixated on the figure, so if the government suddenly reaches the figure, all our problems are solved. Far from it. We spend a quarter of our defence budget on the nuclear deterrent. That's where a lot of our money goes. What are we doing in terms of investing in the technology that we've seen in Ukraine? Ukraine has now become one of the foremost military powers in the world.
You're not questioning the spending on the nuclear deterrent? Or do you think
I'm not questioning the spending on nuclear deterrent, but I think it should be part of the debate. It should be noted that one of the reasons that we can't spend on the kind of kit that Ukraine is using effectively is because a lot of our money goes on nuclear deterrent, which is obviously massively important for us and for NATO.
And you say that's the right thing to do.
Absolutely.
Keep spending on the nuclear deterrent. Right, well, much more to discuss on that speech coming up in just a second. But Mark Rutte and reaction to that interview will feature on our late-night programme, The Wrap, tonight from 10 p.m. Here to discuss all of today's big stories and the best of tomorrow's papers will be Daily Mirror columnist Kevin Maguire and former First Minister of Northern Ireland, Baroness Arlene Foster. Lots more still to come here.
The best thing about being a Sky News journalist... My darling.
Beth Rigby, Sky News.
Is being a Sky News journalist. You said to people, I'm not coming back for more, but you have come back for more. Well, let's kick off and make a statement. What can our Prime Minister say to you to not impose tariffs? He's coming out! What more do you need?
PM in waiting Andy Burnham has been setting out his priorities for government at a major speech in Manchester. Well, where else? On the agenda was more council house building, more public ownership of utilities and more devolution, with a number 10 for the North. Our political editor Beth Rigby was there.
For so long, the King of the North, now Prime Minister in waiting, Andy Burnham back in Manchester to explain what he'll do when he walks into number 10 in 3 weeks' time, pledging nothing less than a rewiring of the British state.
Westminster hasn't been working for people, and it hasn't been working for a very long time. In fact, it is broken. We will bring about the biggest rebalancing of power our country has seen. It is time for Whitehall to accept that growth cannot be ordered from the top down. Instead, it can only be nurtured from the bottom up.
Manchester, his North Star.
This is Manchesterism. It is a vision for good growth and a rejection of the old trickle-down model.
Manchesterism, his philosophy, number 10 North, its incarnation.
The job of number 10 North will be to make power flow into the Midlands, into the southwest, into the east of England, and yes, into London, as I said before, as much as into the northeast, Yorkshire and the Humber, and here in the northwest. Number 10 North will be the nerve centre of a rewired Britain.
That rewiring starting with the housing crisis.
Number 10 North will oversee the biggest council house building programme since the post-war period.
Burnham insists his proposal's possible within Starmer's fiscal rules, but this a speech more about storytelling than spreadsheets.
Imagine good growth in every postcode and hope in every heart. Well, imagine no more. Let's make it happen.
That man's likely to become your Prime Minister in 3 weeks' time without a general election to win you over, a leadership contest to set out his stall to the Labour Party, and interrogation from MPs or even questions today. What he has set out are promises that mimic in some way what Starmer said in 2024. A 10-year mission to raise living standards, a transfer of power away from Westminster and a better deal for Britain's young people. So what are we getting in this transfer of power from Starmer to Burnham? A change of direction or a better storyteller at the top? Burnham not taking any questions. That job left for allies. What are we getting with Andy Burnham? Are we just getting a better storyteller here?
Oh, I don't think you could listen to what he was setting out there today and say that it's just a different cover. I think this is a really profound rewiring of how the economy works, how the country works, that giving power and real punch to places, they can better solve the challenges that they face and they can better bring those jobs and those opportunities, a good home for people in their areas.
A lot of this is absolutely about telling a story of Britain, telling a story of the North, telling the story of hope and opportunity, but it also absolutely has to be about cold, hard delivery.
You are at the moment the Chief Whip. Are you feeling quite shell-shocked about the pace and scale of events for the Labour Party and the country?
I think the strength of his message has partly affected the timescale around it, but in the main I pick up in the parliamentary Labour Party and in the country a sense of excitement.
But this bloodless coup has left opponents with a sense of frustration.
Andy Burnham is already the Prime Minister in everything but name. He needs to act like a leader, put an end to speculation, walk into number 10, name his cabinet and come to Parliament to tell the country what he plans to do.
Has Keir Starmer let you down on defence spending? Are you expecting better from Andy Burnham, sir?
Back in Downing Street, the actual Prime Minister meeting NATO chief Mark Rutte as he prepares to publish Britain's defence investment plan, Starmer's last legacy act as Westminster waits for Burnham. Beth Rigby, Sky News.
Well, joining me now is the Mayor of South Yorkshire, Oliver Coppard, who was at that speech earlier. Oliver, I wanted to ask you about Andy Burnham's vision for devolution, the biggest change in our lifetimes in the way the country is run. That's what he's saying. What guarantee, though, is there that mayors or council leaders will spend money better than ministers and people in Whitehall?
Well, as a mayor, look, I'm clearly closer to the problems, the challenges, but also the opportunities that we have in a place like South Yorkshire. It's no guarantee, of course it isn't, but what it is absolutely a different way of doing politics, of doing policy, of doing delivery, and it's one that's worked in Greater Manchester, it's one that works here in South Yorkshire, it's one that's working already across the country. And if you look at the evidence of places like Greater Manchester, where there's been a 3% return on growth, whereas in the country at large, it's been, 1.5%. Here in South Yorkshire, we've seen 64% growth in Rotherham in productivity terms alone over the last 20 years. That's in no small part down to devolution and being able to take decisions more locally. That's the difference it can make.
But when you look at health and education performance, for example, in Scotland or Wales, it hasn't worked there, has it? So I suppose there's a risk, isn't there, in the vision that Andy Burnham set out today?
Yeah, there is a risk. Of course there is. I mean, I wouldn't deny that there are elements of devolution, particularly in places like Scotland or Wales, that haven't worked as well as they could have done. But in Wales, they've just voted out the government because they didn't like what they were doing and they can get a new one in. In Scotland, there's been, I think, challenges there with leadership over the last, 20 years. It isn't innate that devolution gives you a better outcome, but better leadership in a local sense, in a local setting, does give you better outcomes. That's what it looks like over in Greater Manchester. It's what I've seen here in South Yorkshire. But if it doesn't work, people here locally get the opportunity to vote me out or vote the mayor out, wherever they may be. And that's the difference. It connects people and politics more effectively, and it means that politics can genuinely reflect the needs and the opportunities on the ground in places like mine.
I just wonder about, on a national scale, for example, he sees what he's done on the buses in Manchester as a template for what he hopes to do on utilities. But, I mean, there are big questions, aren't there, over funding of the bus, the B network. I think it's requiring £135 million of public money. And now there's a suggestion that whoever succeeds Andy Burnham as Mayor of Manchester might have to increase fares or taxes or passenger numbers. There's a funding shortfall there. So isn't there a similar risk if he applies the same template to utilities?
So I can't talk to you about the numbers in Greater Manchester, but I can talk to you about the numbers here in South Yorkshire. We're investing £350 million in our bus network over the next decade plus. We're doing that because the bus network right now doesn't work for most people. And when the bus network breaks, it's not like the private sector steps in. They come to me and ask me to fund it. So at the moment, we're spending in excess of £30 million just propping up what is a substandard network. That's every single year. Me stepping into that space and taking control of the buses means I have control of fares, routes and timetables. And yes, it costs money, but it's a public service that will help me grow the economy of South Yorkshire. This is not just about what are you spending, it's what do you get back in return for that spending. It's how can you grow an economy more effectively. And the buses, public transport more broadly, are more important than most governments ever seem to give them credit for. Andy's not going to make that mistake. The public control of public transport allows me to connect up buses, jobs, opportunities, schools, and grow the economy more effectively. So yes, some of these things will cost money, but at the same time, they are about growing an economy which works for every part of our country, every corner of our country. And that's where I think governments for a long time have gone wrong.
But I mean, it's quite an expensive vision he's setting out. When you look at the fact he's hinted about a cost of living package that he's going to introduce and the biggest council house building programme since the war. I mean, there's limited funding for either of those things without breaching or at least bending the fiscal rules. And I know he's pledged to sign up to them. So how's he going to square that circle?
Well, it's also about spending money more effectively, right? So it's not just about spending more money. And I couldn't tell you if Andy's going to stick to the fiscal rules or not. As far as I'm concerned, he said he will. It's also about spending the money we do spend more effectively. Defence is a good example. I know you're Your guests were talking about that a moment ago. Spending money locally in places like South Yorkshire on defence, where we have a defence growth deal with the government. We have companies like Forge Masters creating some of the nuclear submarine components, creates growth in the economy here in South Yorkshire and pays back to the economy, not just of South Yorkshire, but the UK. But all too often we don't take that approach. The money goes elsewhere. So it's not just about how much you spend, it's how you spend it, of course. And people like me, mayors in places across the country, I think, know how to spend that money more effectively in local communities and economies that can return that money back to the taxpayer. And that's not an approach we've traditionally taken in this country, but it's what Andy seemed to be spelling out in his speech today.
I'm glad you mentioned defence because, as you say, Mark Rutte, the Secretary-General of NATO, said that he thinks, Andy Burnham should see defence as a growth opportunity. And there were a few hints of that in the speech today. Do you think that the incoming Prime Minister shares your vision on that, the prospects for growth by investing in defence?
Yeah, I do, because I think Andy's seen the same evidence I have from places like the US, where a lot of that defence spending goes into federal and state government and then returns itself in terms of the companies that they grow that then contribute to that local economy. Here in this country, we don't take that approach. A lot of the money goes into the big primes, as we call them, the big defence companies, and doesn't always come into the local economies like places in South Yorkshire. We can do this in a different way. I think Ed was outlining that earlier, saying we have to take a different approach to defence procurement. That should encourage industries in places like South Yorkshire to fill that gap, to fill some of the needs of the British Army, the Navy, the Air Force, and therefore create a different approach to economic growth. I think Andy understands that just like I do, because I see it and so is he.
So he is interested in bombs and budgets because a senior Labour source said the other day to The Spectator that he'd be the first female Labour Prime Minister because he was interested in what that same source called an unashamedly female agenda: health, education, family finances, safer streets, social care, online safety for kids. You've put that one to bed, have you?
Well, look, I just don't agree with anyone who says that men don't care about online safety for kids or welfare spending. It's a slightly reductive argument as far as I'm concerned. I think Andy cares about all of those things and more. And he's shown as the Mayor of Greater Manchester, he's interested in how places get on. And that includes everything from transport to welfare to defence. It's a whole agenda. And I think Andy is interested in all of it as far as I can tell.
You've been kind enough to answer questions tonight, but, Andy Burnham didn't take questions from the media. He hasn't had a leadership contest, doesn't look like he's going to get one. He hasn't been scrutinised and tested in the same way. Do you think he should have taken some questions from the media today?
No, I think it was actually a fairly reasonable approach. I think his speech spoke for itself. I think all too often when I've seen speeches like that given by Keir Starmer or other leaders of other parties, what happens is, and forgive me if I traduce the profession of journalism, which I love so much, you guys do have a tendency to ask questions which don't necessarily accord to the topic at hand. So look, I think Andy will, of course,
depends on what you think the topic is.
Andy will, of course, take questions, I'm sure, and will absolutely face scrutiny. But at the same time, he gave a big speech, his first speech today, where he wanted that message to speak for itself. I, myself, as Mayor of South Yorkshire, I know other mayors were out doing the rounds and talking about what that might mean. You've had no shortage, I think, of guests prepared to talk on Andy's behalf. But look, he will speak, I'm sure, over time about what that agenda means for the country. I just don't think today was necessarily the day to have that conversation.
Well, we look forward to welcoming him on the pink sofa here in the studio. But Oliver, your lights seem to have gone out. So, I hope that's not a judgment on the incoming Prime Minister. But thank you for shedding some light on his speech today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, Luciana and Ed are on the sofa with us. What are you doing, groaning at my feeble joke?
That's great. I'm commending it.
Well, are you slightly clearer after that explanation on his behalf? About the speech, what Manchesterism is, what Burnhamism is?
I thought it was a great speech. I thought in terms of first speech to the country and also to the Labour Party about Andy's prescription of the challenges that we face as a country, his overall mission, which I think we all share, about over the course of the next 10 years driving up living standards. I think we can all get behind that, and then.
It was quite long on vibes, though, wasn't it, and short on substance?
It's his first speech. It was his first speech. He's just won the by-election just over a week ago. He's only been in Westminster just for a couple of days. This is kind of the pivot to actually speaking to the country. Obviously, his responsibility, first and foremost, was to his electorate, his constituency now in Makerfield. It was right that he had the opportunity to sit out his stall, which he did over the course of over half an hour today. And there was policy within it as well. There was the 4 pillars. We heard a lot about how he wants to look at our utilities, how he wants to reindustrialise the country. housing very much kind of central to the theme today, and then everything around education and employment, all really
a 10-year mission,
items.
no less.
Big ticket items.
Ed, did you feel that it was substantial?
Not hugely. I mean, look, I have a bad feeling about Andy Burnham and his premiership. I think it could unravel very quickly. But having said that,
What do you base that feeling on?
Because I don't think he is someone who responds well to pressure. I think he's been in a bubble in Manchester, and I think the problems that he faces as Prime Minister are going to come at him so thick and fast. It's going to be very interesting to see how he copes. Let's hope the trains, the Avanti trains run on time, because, you know...
I don't accept that. I don't accept that because, again, I made the point earlier, but it's worth reinforcing. He's not just been the mayor of a...
He's been a health minister. He's been a culture minister. I think if you've been culture secretary, obviously you're an incredible human being.
And he's been health secretary as well.
And how I said that, yeah.
He served, I served alongside him.
Look, let me start at the beginning. I thought it was a good speech in the sense that it was nice to hear somebody who is articulate and can modulate their voice and communicate an idea and a speech, unlike the present Prime Minister. So I think in that sense, I think the public might warm to him to begin with. All I'm saying... Presentationally, and that's very superficial, but it is important. It is important. It's what Blair had, it's what Cameron had, and it's what Margaret Thatcher had, in my view. So that is important. But the key thing is that he is resolute in what he wants to achieve. I also have no problem with a kind of devolution agenda. It seems to be utterly sensible. You know, you think about the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, you know, I live in London. I would be happy to see the Mayor have control or engagement with our health services. You know, he is the guy who oversees this great city. It seems to me sensible if you can get mayors to have, a say.
He's had responsibility for health in Greater Manchester. Again, a region, not a town, and from that he's shown results. So
yes, but he has a mixed record in Manchester. He didn't act quickly enough on the Greater Manchester Police and the problems they faced. He was lucky finally when his chief constable departed. He's got a great new chief constable now. Has made a big difference. But I think that he's going to there's a whole local government reorganisation going on at the moment, which is seems to me completely going in completely the wrong direction. In Oxfordshire, where I had a constituency, they're splitting the county council into two. It's going to be two sections of 300,000 people. I do believe in the mayoral agenda. I do believe that you can empower mayors and you can make a difference that way. But remember that the Andy Burnham, the health secretary, vigorously opposed devolving health power downwards. Now, people are entitled to change their minds, but the tension between Whitehall and local government is going to be interesting to see how he navigates.
And there is a risk, as Oliver Coppard, his mayoral colleague, admitted, there is a risk that it all goes belly up on devolution and spending.
But on health, just to reinforce the point that he has had...
Reinforce it, Luciana.
He's requested and has had responsibility for health in Greater Manchester, and as a result of which they've had a real focus on prevention and early intervention, and healthy life expectancy figures for that region are better than the rest of the country. So, it's proof of concept. It's a case in point of some examples of where, there's other examples that he shared today.
But respond to the point from his mayoral colleague that there is a risk in all of this devolution agenda in terms of financial risk, that, maybe people don't get the bang for their buck that they should do, and that has happened in Scotland and Wales, for example.
So in and of itself, devolution isn't the answer. It's also coupled with leadership, and it's also coupled with proper support from Whitehall. I think the points that Andy were making today about ensuring that no longer can we have the days where the civil service, rejects devolution, doesn't actually deliver on it. He set out today where we need to see both the combination of the resources and the people to support devolution properly across the country. And we haven't seen that. We haven't seen that.
There was a very interesting analysis of Andy Burnham in the FT over the weekend, and it pointed out places where he has failed. But the one kind of positive that came out of it is that he is a person who gets people round the table, is prepared to listen to different voices. If that is how Andy Burnham plans to govern as Prime Minister, that could be potentially a positive thing. Let's not forget, not just Manchesterism, but, George Osborne was a North West MP, hard to believe, but from that emerged the Northern Powers. That is an example of devolution that I fully get behind, but I also have to admit that the Northern Powerhouse appears to have gone absolutely nowhere. Now, maybe you can blame previous...
Well, that's because it was strangled by Whitehall.
Exactly. So what chimed with me in Andy Burnham's speech was the point about Whitehall silos, and I experienced it as a minister. Whitehall Department spends so much time fighting each other.
Yeah.
It's not our idea, so
Fighting
you can't
Treasury.
have our money. It's so boring. It's so unproductive. So let's see if he can break that stranglehold.
Right.
But it's
So there's
much
agreement
easier said
between
than
the two of
done.
you on that. But should he have taken questions? You know, he hasn't had any scrutiny. You say it's his first speech, but, you know, he should have had a few questions on it, shouldn't he?
So I've seen Andy Burnham take questions on many occasions. He's very comfortable doing so, very adept. I think for the first speech to the country, it was absolutely right that he set out his stall and that the headlines and our discussion are dominated by what he actually said, rather than some questions that follow that go off on a tangent and don't actually, you know, focus
About
on
Ed Miliband.
Exactly.
And he was very clear today. And it's not about the
Exactly.
people and the personalities, it's about the substance.
We're just
of what he sets
incorrigible,
out.
really, aren't we?
You are incorrigible, Cathy. And it is
We'll
blasphemous to say it,
continue.
but I had a sneaking respect for him not taking questions because I
That
did
is
think
blasphemous.
the first question will be, is Ed Miliband going to be your chance?
And
At which point, off you go. Forget the speech. Off you go with 20 questions about his cabinet.
And he'd already said in the speech that he isn't going to appoint anyone or make any announcements until the process, which is underway, which will conclude in just 3 weeks' time, is finished.
But coming back to your earlier point about, you know, Ed's point, you didn't quite answer that he feels it will unravel because he's not good under pressure and he's been in this bubble in Manchester of sort of everybody adores him. And that's where the media, the annoying media, comes in and sort of will be like asking him questions he doesn't want to be asked. How will he manage with those kind of daily pressures?
Well, I think we saw during the pandemic where he showed the strength and the leadership and actually took on the Prime Minister. And that was a pretty pressurised situation because of the situation that was underway in Manchester and the lockdown, you know, that was was affecting him and the population there. So I think there's lots of examples. And I've seen him up close and personal. I've been in his team. I don't have any concerns of that regard. You know.
Great, we'll pause there for a second because we've been talking a lot about Andy Burnham's in-tray, but tonight one headache might have been removed from it because resident doctors in England have brought to an end 3 years of strikes by voting to accept an offer from the government on pay and jobs. Our correspondent Oliver Whitfield-Miocic is in the newsroom for us. And Ollie, this is a bit of a win for the newish Health Secretary, isn't it?
Well, it depends who you ask, Cathy. I'm sure the Department for Health would want to portray it that way for James Murray. But there is a cautionary tale because when Wes Streeting became Health Secretary back in 2024, 18 days later, he offered a roughly 28% pay rise to the British Medical Association's resident doctors, which they then accepted at the time, but obviously have continued their strikes in the past year. There's been at least 21 days of industrial action. This strike...
It's really good news that the resident doctors have today voted to accept the offer that was on the table. This helps to move us forward from a cycle of ongoing strikes, which have been going on for far too long and have cost the country billions of pounds. The cost of the offer on the table is less than the cost of another week of strikes, so it's good value for money for taxpayers, as well as being good news for NHS staff and, crucially, for patients, because it means we can now work with resident doctors to build an NHS that is fit for the future.
James Murray upbeat there, the prospect then that there's going to be more training posts for doctors, 4,500 more training posts and jobs for doctors when they finish their training. Exam fees are going to be waived and reimbursed. They're then going to be a 35.2% pay increase on average. But, and as I just mentioned previously, there is this warning that has been issued within the past hour from the BMA, the chair of the Resident Doctors Association, Jack Fletcher, saying that this isn't the end. It could potentially leave the door open for potential further strikes in the future if the government does not implement the terms of that deal, meaning we could see resident doctors once again on picket lines, potentially for a third time in 3 to 4 years.
Ollie, thanks very much. Well, Luciana and Ed are on the sofa still. Luciana, I mean, lucky Andy, really. On this news, I mean, yeah. It's really good news. I'm really glad. For now. I'm really glad for the resident doctors, for patients, for like our whole health service. You know, we meet at a time where our waiting lists are at the lowest they've been in over 3 years, but there's still more to do, and strike's obviously very difficult for all involved. So the fact we've got a resolution today is really important. I hope of those 4,500 training posts, we're going to see lots in mental health. Well, and if you look at the figures, doctors have already received a 28.9% pay rise since they first went on strike in March 2023. They'll now get, on average, a 6.6% pay rise this year. I mean, is this job well done by the government or job well done by the doctors? Well, I mean,
they've stopped the strikes. They've answered the question about training places. So on the surface, it looks like a job well done. I don't have much time for the BMA. I think they have a radical leadership that is not interested in constructive discussion. I suspect Wes Streeting is gnashing his teeth because a lot of the work was probably done by Wes Streeting before James Murray came in and mopped up at the end. But it's got to be good news if the strikes are going to end. They were very damaging to the health service, and actually they were beginning to have less and less impact because people, consultants and so on, were working around them. But, you know, the doctors underneath it did have a case that their pay had fallen quite dramatically over the last 10 years or so.
I mean, James Murray claimed the credit, but Wes Streeting probably did a lot of the heavy lifting, didn't he?
Obviously, you know, James is a new health secretary, and Wes was in post, and I know did lots of work behind the scenes and did lots of work, you know, across the department with the BMA. So, you know, we've got to the right place now. Obviously, James is in post, but yeah, it's been a long time coming. There's been a lot of difficult negotiations and discussions on this journey.
But do you think Wes Streeting could use this to sort of bolster his chances of a good cabinet job under Andy Burnham?
Well, I certainly hope that Wes Streeting will get a good cabinet job because he's a.
Well, he's not going to get Chancellor, is he?
He's an excellent.
That's what he wanted.
He's an excellent communicator.
What do you think, Foreign Secretary?
Again,
These are the questions we could have put to Ed Miliband, to Andy Burnham, if only had taken questions.
But Andy Burnham was very clear that he's not going to make any appointments before the end of the...
Thank you, Minister.
It would have been a really boring interview, that, wouldn't it? To you know, to go on and on about who he's going to put in his cabinet and he wouldn't be able to answer.
But also, what happens in the intervening period when you've appointed people, if there were any changes, what happens to the, you know, people that are in post for the next few weeks? It's not very fair, is it?
No, I agree. He can't appoint his cabinet until he becomes Prime Minister.
Exactly. So, you know, why are we having this conversation?
I mean, it is...
Because it's fun. It's a parlour game. It's a Westminster parlour game that we play all the time.
But I don't think the public like it. I mean, you know, there's people in post who've got jobs to do, and that's what James Murray's been doing to get to the point today on the doctor strikes.
True. I mean, it is possible that these strikes do come back, isn't it, as Ollie was saying there. So, I mean, this is a...
I think that's unfair. I think, you know, the government's made commitments today, but specifically on the 4,500 training posts. That's really important to resident doctors. I know, having spoken to a number of them, they want to have the jobs when they come out of their training. That is going to happen. Obviously, in terms of where they're going to pop up, you know, in what sectors, in which disciplines, that all has to be worked out. But having that commitment to those extra posts, I know will be really warmly received today.
Right. We have a lovely story to leave you with tonight with a blast of nostalgia. The 80th anniversary of the Vespa saw more than 10,000 Vespas converge on Rome. Enthusiasts came from far and wide all over the world, including Australia and the Philippines, to celebrate the scooters made famous by Gregory Peck and Audrey Hepburn in Roman Holiday. You may know that the iconic 80-year-old scooter, originally designed for women to ride elegantly in skirts, helped to revive Italy's economy after the Second World War. So that's a lovely bit of nostalgia to end the programme. Thank you to our sofa guests, and thanks for watching.